Good evening, everyone. At this point in time, it's 5 minutes before our regular meeting starts, and I'd like to invite questions from the audience pertaining to this night's agenda. So if anyone does have any questions or comment about tonight's agenda, if you could come down to the podium, to the table, and we'll take them now.
Good evening. My name is Bob Ashton, and I represent Wembley Place Strata. And that is in property A, of which you're considering 505 Belson tonight, which is property B of that same lot. A couple of concerns. One is with access and egress, and I'm not sure that you're considering that tonight, but I think it's form and nature of the proposal that you're looking at. But we do have some concerns with respect to that, along with a few others that we need to deal with at the developer's level. So just to plant the seed, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 5th regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. Before we carry on with tonight's meeting, I'd also like to mention that Mayor Mark Lefebvre and Councillor Leanne Salter are away this evening. They've been attending the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities in Ottawa, and I'm sure they'll have some items and information to share when they return. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome Councillor Sue Powell back to Council. It's good to have you here this evening. Very shy as well, I notice, yes. All right, for the first item tonight is the adoption of the minutes and the recommendation that the minutes of council meeting held May 15th be adopted, 2017 be adopted. Do I have a mover? Thank you. Councillor Patterson, seconded. Councillor Burden, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? All right, thank you, and none opposed. That's carried. Secondly, the approval of the agenda and the recommendation that is that the June 5th, 2017 council meeting agenda be approved. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Oates, and seconded by Councillor Powell. And again, are there any errors or omissions? And seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. We have one delegation this evening, and that is the Vancouver Island University Community Park Master Plan update. So Sarah Lumley of the VIU Master Students program will be giving us an update on the progress of the Community Park Master Plan. Welcome, Sarah, and please take a seat at the front.
Well, good evening, Acting Mayor Bale and Council. My name is Sarah Lumley, and I'm the current project lead for the VIU Parks Planning Project. And I'm just here to provide a bit of a brief update. Before I do that, I'd like to introduce the rest of my team that are here. So that's Director of Research, Pam Shaw, there. And she's also the director of the Master of Community Planning program at VIU, as well as Carson Anderson and Lauren Shaw, who are students working with me this summer on the planning project. So just as a quick refresh to the project, VIU has basically accepted this project to work in partnership with the City of Parksville on a two-component project. So the first component of the project is a parks inventory. So this is of all the parks in Parksville, involving field work and a little bit of consultation about all of the parks. And the second component of the project is creating the draft or the final version of the Community Park Master Plan. So that'll be a 20-year plan for Community Park. As part of both deliverables, students have been consulting with the community through various events and interviews, and that all started in January 2017. So the last time we were here was in March. We provided a bit of an update then, and so we've done a lot since then. We completed a fieldworks of all of the parks, so we completed surveys. Students went out in pairs and looked at different assets and inventoried those parks, so that is complete now. We conducted interviews with users of community parks specifically, and those we called picnic table talks. So those were interviews on a specific list that was provided by the city of users that we wanted to talk to regarding their use of that specific park. In addition to this, we've been running a resident survey, which you may have seen all the wonderful advertising for. That was started on May 5th, and has now actually been extended until June 16th. So that survey is ongoing. There was a big mail out, and everybody got an individual code mailed to them, and that is associated with an online survey. So that's continuing until the 16th. We've also just summarized all the consultation to date, and in the handout that I've provided for everybody, we've developed 5 guiding principles for the Community Park Master Plan, and those were derived from all of the consultation with the community. So we brought together all of the different summaries of the events and came up with these 5 principles that we think reflect what the community has told us, and we'll be using these to guide the rest of the master plan for Community Park. And just to read those for those who don't have the handout, those 5 principles are: celebrate the unique culture and heritage of the Parksville community, create a more accessible park for everyone, support sustainable infrastructure use and maintenance, protect the natural environment and waterfront, encourage fun and vibrant activities in the community park. And it was the hope that those would encompass all of the various themes and issues that have been brought to our attention. And just as a brief update on a new part of the project that was given to us by city staff, and actually at the request of the fire department, was the naming of 3 roads within the park. So we'll be adding that to our list of things to do as well. And last but not least, what's next? The biggest thing, which is also on your handout, is the gazebo talks coming up on Thursday. So that's June 8th from 2 to 7, and that's an open house event at the gazebo in the community park. And we hope to see some of you there. We also have a tourist survey. So this will differ a little bit from our resident survey because students will actually be going and hand delivering this one in the park. So we'll be down there every Friday and Saturday in July, except for the long weekend. So that's 4 weeks of surveying on the Fridays and Saturdays. And we will also be working on the inventory report and creating recommendations for all of the parks. And then we will be completing a first draft of the Community Park Master Plan, which will be presented to Council on August 21st at the meeting then. And last but not least, I would like to say a big thank you to city staff for helping us so much on the project so far. And I'll leave it to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And do we have any questions from Council regarding Councillor Oates?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Refresh my memory. How many students are involved in this?
So for the majority of the project, this summer we have, I say like the planning side of things, we have about 5 students, including myself, that are working specifically on this project as kind of their main focus. But at the Research Institute right now, the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region Research Institute, we have about, I think 16, maybe more. I believe we just hired 2 more. And for certain big events and things like that, we'll have all of the students come out for those sort of things. So at Gazebo Talks, you'll see more than just our select group of students at that one.
So thank you very, very much. And once again, great to hear that the online survey deadline has been extended. So those in the community who haven't done that still have an opportunity. This Thursday, gazebo down in the park. It sounds like people need to be prepared for some blustery weather, but hopefully there'll still be a good turnout. And finally, really look forward to hearing the final presentation once you've wrapped everything up. So thank you. Okay, and moving along in our agenda, our first report today is from Mr. Butterworth. Could you please give us a background on the issue regarding the 2016 Statement of Financial Information? And this is public reporting of financial information in accordance with the Financial Information Act and associated regulations. And do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Burden and Councillor Powell. Thank you. Mr. Butterworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Financial Information Act requires all municipalities in BC to prepare a statement of financial information, which has prescribed information and a prescribed format. In finance, we call this the SOFI. In order to complete the report, it must be approved by council. The SOFI contains the city's audited financial statements, schedules of council and employee remuneration and expenses, statement of severance agreements, a list of payments to suppliers and contractors, and a few other schedules. And the recommendation is as per the agenda.
Are there any questions or comments from, yes, Councillor Burden?
Sorry, just a quick one. Under the schedule of payments made for the provision of goods or services, I note that we have a Visa card. And 47, if I could just have a brief outline of what that's used for.
Yes, through the Madam Mayor to the Councillor. The Visa, we actually have, not all, but most of the directors have a Visa. I think we have 5 Visa cards, and they're used for purchasing hotel rooms for conferences, conference fees, other travel costs, various association dues, and sort of the main stuff that I can think of off the top of my head. The odd supplies and materials, but mostly it's relating to travel-related stuff. We also, with our Visa, have a travel points, and we do cash in the points to offset the travel periodically.
Thank you, Mr. Butterworth. Seeing no further questions, comments, I'll ask the question then. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. That is carried. All right. And moving along, our next report is from Mr. Russell. Mr. Russell, could you please give us the background on the issue regarding consideration of a development permit at 505 Belson Street? And do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Powell, and a seconder, Councillor Oates. Thank you. Mr. Russell, please.
If I may, Your Worship, before Council for consideration is the request by the applicant for a development permit to authorize the general architectural form and character of building, landscaping, and site treatments in order to facilitate the eventual construction of a patio home development.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Are there any, Mr. Burden, Councillor Burden?
So I attended a public information meeting, some time ago now, and the same question came up tonight with regard to the access points, and I'm wondering if the map that we have in the package is very small. Can you tell me what consideration was given?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Burden, that's part of a separate subdivision application, and no determination has yet been rendered on the subdivision.
Councillor Powell?
Just a quick follow-up, if I may.
Follow-up? Go ahead,
So just to confirm that you have sole decision-making as the subdivision officer on that, is that correct?
If I may, Your Worship, yes, the subdivision approving officer is a technical exercise, and so that's something that would be vetted through that process.
Okay.
Councillor Powell?
Thank you. So it's my understanding, through you to the Director of Planning, it's my understanding that there was legal agreements made prior to this new subdivision with the old subdivision, and that there's not a lot that we can do at this point. Is that correct?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell, there are a number of easement agreements that are currently under review. As approving officer, I'll actually be having my solicitor review those documents so I know the full ins and outs of them. There's a stack, probably like a good Encyclopedia Britannica set, but they do provide a number of rights and privileges to the property owners.
follow-up? Go ahead, Councillor
So
Powell.
this is just a comment. This is a previous council that agreed to these terms and the extra legalese?
It would have been a previous council and approving officer many years ago that established these.
Councillor O's?
Thank you. So I'm wondering, how does a person get their issue addressed, like the citizen that came before us tonight when the questions were asked to the agenda? If we approve this tonight, does that close any opportunities for citizens such as that to express their concerns, or is there another opportunity or another venue where those concerns could be more appropriately heard, or is tonight that venue?
If Mayor Worship, through to Councillor Oates, the development permit process that Council is considering this evening is not a public input process. It is strictly based on whether or not the proposal is in compliance with the applicable development permit area guidelines. And in this particular case, those guidelines are really looking at the architectural aspects. Are the buildings pretty or not? Is the landscaping sufficient or not? It's not getting into the site layout details. With respect to the review of that, the approving officer certainly is looking at access. That's one of the things that the approving officer looks at, and looks at its impact on neighborhoods. In a number of respects, some of the decisions are out of the approving officer's hands, and that they were cast many years ago as part of the original development. The applicant, though, is looking at potentially adding a secondary access to relieve some of the access concerns, and that's still being sorted out, the particulars of that.
And Mr. Russell, if I may ask a question, at that point, if the applicant is coming forth with requests for additional access, is it possible that that would come before council, or would that rest solely with the approving officer and perhaps the engineering department, et cetera?
If I may, Worship, through to yourself. It ultimately depends on the specifics of it. An access permit is required for an access crossing, and that's a staff administered. It's administered by the engineering department, and it's really a technical exercise. Is the access far enough away from other intersections? Is the width of the access sufficient? Is a proper culvert required where provided? The approving officer end of it is really, is it a condition of approval for the subdivision that this person satisfy some form of alternative access? Depending on the scope and magnitude, it may trigger a development permit or it may not. And again, what council would be looking at more would be the aesthetics. The guidelines in this area are really the aesthetics of things. So are the aesthetics of that proposed access adequate or not?
Thank you, Mr. Russell. And Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I'm looking at the recommendations, and number 3 as the landscaping security in the amount of $309,000, it's to be submitted to the city prior to the commencement of the land alteration. And is that held by the city, or is that part of the landscaping that will be done?
If I may, Your Worship, it's ultimately held by the city, but there's 2 mechanisms that it can be held. They can either provide cash, and then the city basically puts that in an interest-bearing account, or they can do what's called a letter of credit, where in a sense the money is actually within their own bank account, but the city has a hold on that money in their bank account. It is a separate fund from the money that they will use to actually purchase the landscaping. And what typically happens is, let's say they're halfway through, they may make a request for an inspection and for a partial release of that bonding.
Just a quick little follow-up. So when an inspection is done, is that done through the city?
If I may, Your Worship, it is typically done by the city, by the planning department.
And thank you. And Mr. Russell, I do have a couple of questions that are related to the actual report, which I do understand is regarding character and form and not some of the areas that we've dwelled into. One question I have, in the report on page 57, there's a reference to improve connectivity to Wembley Mall and transit. Now, as Councillor Burden mentioned, the font, the maps are quite small, so I think I see a connection all the way through. I just wasn't sure about that. So is there in fact an outline of some kind of a pathway that goes right out to 19A, or does it just get close to there?
If I may, Your Worship, through to you. The plans, there's a separate parcel of land, and at this point in time, they would get you closer to that parcel of land that's by Wembley Mall, but this development permit is strictly issuing those items on this parcel.
Okay, yes, I did wonder about that because I know that there is a third lot. I also notice on that same page a reference to semi-public, and I'm not sure what semi-public really means. And again, it's with parks and walkways, and I wonder if that can be clarified.
If I may, Your Worship, I believe it would be for the enjoyment of those within the strata or members of other stratas that may have reciprocal access agreements on this land as well.
Thank you. And yet, may I ask, with that then, is that referring to, though, a portion of the development that goes to parks in general for the city?
If I may, Your Worship, that would not be considered parkland dedication.
Thank you, and you're not quite off the hook yet. On page 59, I notice that there's reference to parking, and I don't necessarily see any reference to visitor parking, and I'm wondering if there are additional parking areas for visitors. I'm acutely aware of some of the concerns in the already developed area of the strata that have some visitor parking limitations, and there have been some concerns. I'm not clear if the width of the streets really allow for any on-street parking, and can you speak to that?
If I may, Your Worship, I believe the parking for these units is intended to be accommodated, in this phase, is intended to be accommodated on the individual lots. They will be individual Bearland strata lots, very similar to a conventional single-family residential lot, other than the common areas, the roads, and the semi-public park or green area would be owned by the strata jointly. But there is no specific parking area proposed as part of this phase.
All right, seeing no further questions or comments, I'd like to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. And Mr. Russell, once again, moving on, could you please give us background on the issue regarding consideration of a development application at 651 Sanderson Road? And do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Burden, and seconded by Councillor Powell. And please go ahead, Mr. Russell.
If I may, Your Worship, this is a development permit that intends to facilitate the reutilization of an existing drainage pipe. A prior development permit was issued on the property for a new dwelling. The drainage that was proposed at the time was found to be not suitable, and so a geotechnical engineer is recommending the repurposing of this existing drainage with some improved modifications at its outlet to work as a water dissipator. And the recommendations are as per the agenda. I should mention one other thing. As a term of the development permit, it's still tied to the original development permit as far as environmental considerations and timings are concerned, and it's really an amendment or an augmentation of that previously issued permit.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments about this particular item? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. All right. And Mr. Russell, once again. Consideration of, if you could give us a background on the issue regarding consideration of a development permit for an industrial facility at 1128 Herring Gull Way. This is for the issuance of a development permit. And do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Powell and Councillor Patterson. Thank you.
If I may, if I may, Your Worship, for council consideration, the applicant is requesting issuance of development permit to facilitate an industrial facility consisting of 2 industrial buildings, a combined office and caretaker residence building, and associated landscaping.
Councillor Burden.
I think you probably know the question. It has to do with the requirement of having development permits within the industrial park, which I believe was serviced and designed by the city. I know you explained a little bit to me, but it didn't. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me that we would require this additional step for people going through the process within something that we know is suitable.
Mr. Russell, can you clarify for council?
Sure. So a couple things. So the development permit area itself is a continuation of a development permit area that was established in the old official community plan, and it was carried over the same form and character requirements essentially. At the time, council also wished to, as part of the new OCP, an aspect that deals with groundwater in the area. So it's in these 2 designations. There's a couple things. As far as whether it's in a development permit area or not, that can certainly be reviewed. There are multiple methods of dealing with it, whether or not it remains in a development permit or whether or not, for example, certain development permits can be delegated. Issuance council does not have to issue all development permits. We do also, under review right now, which is a topic that with the design panel will be bringing forward, is looking at what development permits make sense for the design panel to review and what development permits do not make sense for the design panel to review. So as part of our work program for this year, those are topics that we would like to bring forward to council.
Thank you. Follow-up, Councillor Burden?
So, my purpose is to find ways to improve the speed in which we process things. I got a call from an individual who was looking at a different piece of property in the industrial park and wanting to know what he was going to have to go through to bring a business to our community that was going to employ people. And so any way that we can find to speed things along is within the appropriate guidelines is okay with me.
Any further questions, comments? Okay, hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, for the next item on the agenda, it's a report, again, from Mr. Russell to give us a regarding a follow-up report on further consideration of a zoning and development bylaw amendment application at 451, 461, and 465 Hearst Avenue West. And I understand at this time that Councillor Burden wishes to recuse himself.
I do. I have an interest in the property next door.
Thank you, Councillor Burden. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Powell, and seconded by Councillor Oates. Okay, thank you. Mr. Russell, please go ahead.
For council consideration this evening is a follow-up report for further consideration of the zoning and development application at 451, 461, and 465 Hearst Avenue. Previously at council, the bylaw was given first reading, and there was a few outstanding items that the applicant needed to address. One of them was the hosting of a public open house, which the applicant did host, and it's further details provided in the report, as well as clarification from the applicant on the off-site services that they were willing to or agreeable to do. They are now in agreement to do those services, and they're in accordance with the engineering department's recommendations. So at this point, from a staff perspective, there would seem to be merit to further advance the application and for council to consider that advancement this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Any questions from council? I do, if not. Seeing none from others, I do have some questions I would like to bring forward. And I guess, first of all, I'd like to say how generally positive the public input responses are, that generally people seem to approve of the design, and with a few concerns about landscaping privacy, which I understand could be addressed at a later dish. But I am concerned that if this goes ahead and there is rezoning, I don't see anything here that would restrict the possibility of something completely different, in fact, being built. So I'm wondering what, if anything, can be done to ensure that what the public has seen and responded positively to would, in fact, be very close to what is actually eventually developed. Can you edify us on that, please, Mr. Russell?
If I may, Your Worship, there are some constraints encumbered themselves within the zone. So it establishes, for example, the maximum height that buildings may be built to. So in this case, that's 7.5 meters, which would typically facilitate a two-story development. There's also maximum parcel coverage and maximum number of dwelling units specified in the zone. Those numbers are a little bit higher. For example, I believe it's 25 dwelling units per hectare where no bonus density provisions are taken advantage of. My recollection is it's around 33 or 34 dwelling units per hectare if someone was to conceal approximately 80% of the parking on site. There is another bonus density provision where the city, through a bylaw, establishes a housing agreement, but council would have a discretion whether or not it went ahead with such a bylaw. So at this point, the maximum achievable would be a combination of the base density plus that parking bonus that I mentioned. If council wanted to provide a greater assurance, things like restrictive covenants have been used. And again, that's if that's something that council is seeking.
And I'll ask myself for a follow-up. No. So if we were to ask for a restrictive covenant, how would one go about doing that?
A restrictive covenant could be utilized to restrict the number of dwelling units, for example. A maximum of 25 dwelling units or 30 dwelling units. It would not lock in the specific built form. That's actually fairly hard to lock in a building form, but it would maybe provide some assurance if that was a concern.
And another question, Mr. Russell, if we were to approve this as is right now, are there still opportunities, because it would go ahead to public hearing, would it not? Are there still opportunities to work towards getting some assurances of what would in fact be built?
If I may, Your Worship, certainly that's a possibility, and there's an opportunity to amend the bylaw as a result of input from the public.
I don't know if the applicant is in the audience tonight. I don't think so, because otherwise we could maybe ask those questions. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Just on page 156 of 160 of our package in regards to the lot grading, It just said, what caught my attention was that it says that this is an unacceptable cut slope in regards to the 2-meter high slope down into Banks Avenue. So the retaining wall of 1.2 meters in height requires a building permit and design by a professional engineer. So would that mean that the retaining wall would end up being higher than our normal standards, or?
If a mayor worship through to Councillor, that would be addressed as part of the development permit. We don't typically get into the on-site grading at the rezoning stage, and so the particulars of how slope are addressed, it's sort of flagging them as a potential future issue, so that will need to be addressed, but it's really at that development permit stage where that's where we get into the land grading and how they're landscaping it and how they're addressing the slope and the buildings that are going on site.
Okay, because that's where I was concerned with some of the privacy and aspects of the other properties behind and such. And
if I may, Your Worship, that would also be where council would be accepting or not accepting the proposal for landscape screening on the site.
thank you.
Okay, not hearing any further questions or comments, I'll call the vote on this. All those in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Apologies to Councillor Burden, we brought you in a little bit too soon. Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay. We can certainly do that. If sure. If he has a Fitbit or something like that on, he'll get extra steps. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is bylaws, and we have one bylaw for second reading and advancement to public hearing this evening, and that's the Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2016, number 2000.104, and that's the map amendment to 451, 461, and 465 Hearst Avenue West from RS1 to RS2.
Okay, now I understand, and I'll make the walk again.
Thank you, Councillor Burden. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Powell and Councillor Oates. And any further questions, comments? Okay. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. All right, it's that time of the agenda when we move to new business, and I do have a few items, but I'll start with other councillor members and council members, starting with Councillor Patterson and coming around.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. While Councillor Powell was away, I did fill in a couple of times for some of her liaison seats. One was with the Downtown Parksville Business Association, and I'm not sure if Councillor Burden would like to bring this forward. We were chatting a little bit in regards with the construction slated for Corefield. So there are some concerns in regards to the timeline of that project, and I think, were you going to touch base on that?
Yes, and I was speaking with Mr. Figuera earlier today, asking for an update about that, so it's quite timely. Mr. Figuera, if you could give us a bit of an update on the timeline for Corefield Street. Thank you.
If I may, Your Worship, so yes, the Corefield project is about a month behind at the moment, and I will endeavor to explain that. There's a couple of reasons. During the design process, we have external agencies such as Hydro and Fortis and TEL do designs related to the project. So we coordinate that through our consultant. So we had received designs from Hydro on their proposed ducting and inspection chambers for the section on Corefield between Jensen and the highway. Mainly the west side was an issue for us. At the moment, on the west side of Corefield, on that section of road, there isn't enough road right-of-way to fully build out a completed sidewalk and boulevard on the west side. So the way that Hydro had done the design would inhibit us from a future expansion once that section is ready. So once we were to acquire additional lands, our build-out would be hindered. So we sent the design back to them to redo it, and we recently just received the revised design. It looks good now. We're ready with the design, but that did put us behind somewhat. We're also involved in some property issues that we've been able to work through. So in doing so, we've had discussions with the consultant, and in our own knowledge of the market right now, we are seriously contemplating delaying the construction to the fall. So council would be seeing a report from staff in the summer related to a tender, and the tender closing would be by the end of summer, and then the construction is recommended for the fall, and there's a number of reasons why we would recommend that. Some of them are certainly the impact on business. We've heard that business is concerned about July and August. Having a significant impact on the road in July and August is an issue. Because this is delayed, we'd be in that section of road in July and August if we didn't push the construction. Another consideration is we are aware of the nature of the market right now for contractors. It's very busy out there. Lots of developments going on, as the Director of Planning can probably reinforce. I think they're seeing about twice as many developments as they were at the same time last year. So there's lots of construction activity right now. Nanaimo just recently sent out a tender, and they got for a similar kind of work, and they got 0 replies. Everybody's so busy. And that kind of a market, you're either going to get very little response, or you're going to get really high prices. Another reason to delay it to the fall to get better prices. So those are the basic reasons we're looking at delaying it. Once we make our final decision, we will be reporting back to the businesses and the public on when they can expect to see us break ground out there. So another thing to keep in mind too, if we do delay it, we will likely be unable to complete the final paving work until after Christmas. But we will be requiring the contractor to leave the road in a good condition It's just a matter of asking them to make some extra effort and time into their patchwork for the trenches to make sure that it'll hold up all winter, so that next year we're all ready to go. We pull off the pavement and then pave it.
Thank you, Mr. Figuera, for the update. Good to know that the construction will not be taking place in the summer. Councillor Burden, related to that?
So thank you very much for that. I heard some ifs. Will you be coming back to council to remove the ifs at some point, or you said you'd be keeping the business community appraised, and if you decide to delay, so when will that decision be made, and will you be coming back to council with that decision?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Burden. We are just confirming a few issues with the consultant, but when we decide to delay it, we will basically be making the decision and informing the businesses that we'll be pushing the tender response. Will be coming back in the summer, and we'll be tendering in the winter. We won't really bringing it back to council to make that decision. We wouldn't normally do that.
So I think just to clarify, the construction will not be taking place in July and August.
That is correct.
Thank you. And back to Councillor Patterson, who has the floor for new business.
Thank you, Your Worship. That was one of the biggest one. But in regards with the PDBA as well, last week they had a wayfinding open house. So that was really interesting. I attended, as well as a few others around the table. There was also at their monthly meeting, Staff Sergeant Pelchier gave a kind of a update on the state of our community in regards with business and some of the extracurricular type activity that occurs in the police department. So it was quite interesting. I think I will leave that for his report. And the executive director, Pam Bottomley, has got some applications in for the summer students, which I think is fabulous. And there's not been a whole lot of other things on my plate right now. I did attend an opening at the MAC last week, which was really amazing to see some of the artwork and everything that's in the community and what they're bringing into this community as far as artists go. And I just wanted to, I think we have one more council date, but prior to graduation for Parksville students. Last weekend was Qualicum Beach, but Parksville's grad commencement will be on June 30th on a Friday of this year. And as I've said in the past, we have some really, really amazing youth in this community, which I don't think gets recognized enough. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple items. First, I just want to take the opportunity to remind people that the annual general meeting for the Parksville Community and Conference Center is taking place on the 15th of June at 7 p.m. There's a list of new people that wish to be on the board there, so we're looking forward to that being a robust meeting and that group being successful in the future. On another note, I want to recognize the park staff and the design of the flower bed up on Pym Street and the Island Highway. It's absolutely beautiful. Can't wait to see all the colors come in there. Warren was here earlier. I see he's gone now. It's too bad, but kudos to him and his crew for that there. I always look forward to what little surprise they have for us up there, and it never fails to delight me. And I particularly like the tie into the Canada 150 theme this year, and a good job. And the last thing is I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move that staff prepare a bylaw that addresses the height of hedges. I'd like to speak to that. This is a follow-up to our what we dealt with earlier. We dealt with earlier the issue with the height of fences, but I understand that what one may not be able to achieve with a fence, one could achieve with a hedge. So I think that needs to be addressed, and I'm looking forward to staff bringing forward a bylaw to that. I'm hoping that can be something that can be done in a timely fashion. It's something I think you just replace the word fence with hedge, and we're probably good to go.
Are there any questions or comments about this? I would like to share a comment. I recall speaking with a resident about, about that topic, and the particular resident, I know prompting him, I said, there's a difference though. One is like a living fence and you get greenery and you get landscaping as opposed to it feeling like a wall. But anyway, and the deer maybe can't go over it. All right, hearing no further questions. We did have a seconder, did we not? That was Councillor Patterson. Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? So you're very no. So that is carried, correct? No? Oh. Fair enough. So it has carried. It's 3-2.
If I may, Your Worship, can we just get a restatement of that and then of who's opposed and who's for it?
All right. And the motion is to request staff prepare a report regarding the height of hedges with the notion that, pardon me? Oh, prepare a bylaw regarding the height of hedges that addresses the height of hedges. Okay, period. All right. All those in favor and opposed? That is carried. And Councillor Oates, anything further? Okay. Moving on to Councillor Powell.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you very much to the community of Parksville, Qualicum, and Nanaimo for their support during the election. I have to tell you, it was exciting. It was exhilarating. I have no regrets for the outcome of that election. I think that my team and I did extremely well. I would also like to say that we had 71% voter turnout for Parksville, Qualicum constituency. Like, that's unheard of. Like, we beat the average in the province, which had, I believe, 60. Last time we had 67%. So I think that shows that people are interested in what happens in our communities. And I would also like to thank Council for giving me the leave to participate in the election and for covering for me. Thank you very much, Councillor Patterson, for taking over my responsibilities, as well as Councillor Oates. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Burden, new business?
Just a couple of things. On May the 24th, Councillor Oates, Councillor Beale, Mayor Lefebvre, and myself rode the big bike. We raised, was Mayor Councillor Beale not there? No, you contributed in a different way. You did. Well, that's okay. You contributed. You contributed financially. We raised over $2,000 for the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and we were riding with a light team, but that's okay. We finished the route, and it was a lot of fun. On June the 21st is the Wheel Walkabout with Access Oceanside, so just maybe make a note of that in your calendars, and more information to come. I attended the Beach Fest meeting on behalf of Councillor Oates last month, and thank you to Lucky. I was approached to find a way to include the Tim Hortons coffee truck in their display down at the community park, and thank you so much for finding a way to get that done. And also attended the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance annual general meeting on Friday in Port Alberni. A lot of respect for that group, and would encourage everybody to turn out to their October summit. It really is something that is a must on my calendar, and should be on everybody's calendar in terms of finding out what's going on on Vancouver Island from a business perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, one more item. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could just maybe either ask staff or I'm not sure, but we are a member of that organization. Do we send anyone from council to you specific? Well, do you wear a lot of different hats?
I wore the same badge that you have on tonight when I went to that meeting at the request of Mayor Lefebvre, who was absent.
Okay. Could I put a motion forward that we extend an invitation to all council to attend that summit? Or have we? I'm not sure. So if I could have staff. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a couple of items with new business. First of all, summer coffee with council schedule. For the summer months, starting in June, coffee with council will be held the first and third Thursdays, regular time from 2 to 4. Also, as was mentioned earlier with the parks update, the Community Park Residents Survey, that's the online survey, the deadline has been extended to June 16th. It does require an access code to complete, and if anyone has misplaced their access code that was sent out or did not receive one, you may call the city in order to get an access code. Also, again, on the topic of parks, the gazebo talks are June 8th. That's this Thursday, and VIU students and the city are hosting gazebo talks from 2 to 7 p.m. So anytime you can make it down, please come on down to the park. And they will be at the waterfront gazebo in the community park, ready to share their progress to date, and also continue to ask the community for their thoughts about the community park. There will be a number of opportunities for residents and visitors to participate and provide comments and suggestions, including activities for children to say what they would like to see in the park. Also, this Thursday, June 8th, is World Oceans Day. And as a coastal community surrounded by rivers and lakes, Parksville recognizes the need to protect our waterways, oceans, and marine life. And I believe that if you Google or if you search World Oceans Day, you will find a number of ways that you could get involved in taking some action. I would also like to mention, as we all know here in this town, in this community, that volunteers play a huge role in making this a great place to live and work and play. And I had the opportunity to take part in a number of volunteer activities recently, and they were all aiding conservation efforts. Broom busters. By the way, this is the end of this year's season for broom busting, as the plants are now producing seeds. So please stop cutting, and we'll leave it until the coming year. Good progress has been made, but there's certainly more to do if we're going to make Parksville completely broom-free, which I think we could certainly do, but hopefully next year we'll make even more progress. One amazing effort recently, the Aerosmith Search and Rescue Group came out to to take part in a broom bus on the cliff face at Little Mountain just outside of town. So they needed to use their ropes and rappel down the cliff face in order to cut broom. And I think you can find some photos out there of that. I took part in the community cut and also a neighborhood cut, so we got quite a bit done there. I'd also like to mention that in the estuary, Nature's Trust is getting some help from the Aerosmith Naturalists and the Mid-Vancouver Island Habitat Enhancement Society, and they're both working together to do some work on documenting the types of plants that are in the estuary, again, in the effort of conservation. And it's just really fantastic, not only to see the range of volunteer groups, but that increasingly volunteer groups working together on a common goal, and really wonderful. Also, again, along the clean up the environment topic, Springwood Elementary School students recently, along with teachers and parents, did a shoreline cleanup in the community park. They did a fantastic job, and some of our operations staff who worked with the group were very impressed. So thank you very much to Springwood students, and hopefully this will carry forth through the coming year. Thank you, Councillor Patterson, for mentioning the Art Council and the display that's on at the MAC. There's an exhibit by Ice Bear right now, and if you didn't get a chance to see the last exhibit, I really encourage you to stop in. Also, that Tidal Treasures is over for the seasons, and there are plans to start again in the fall. I would, as a final item, I'd like to mention to everyone, if you're not already aware, that June is National Aboriginal History Month. This started in 2009 with the passing of a unanimous motion in the House of Commons. I encourage everyone, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, to learn more about the contribution of Indigenous peoples to Canada. Our own public library here will have a display out of materials, and you can also visit the library's website, VIRL, for Vancouver Island Regional Library, .bc.ca. Go to Read for Reconciliation, and you will find a list of recommended titles. So that's just about all. And also thank you to those staff who took part in the Bike to Work, Bike to Anywhere week. We did have a team out this year, and that was really great. Anything else from council? Final call? All right, so I'd like to ask if we have a mover and a seconder for adjournment. Thank you, Councillor Burden and Councillor Oates. And thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight.